you have fun in Chicago? It looked like it. Well, did you know that the art institute in Chicago?
You all set? You all set? Yep. All right. The October 24th, 2016 meeting of the Oregon School Board is called to order at 6:30 p.m. in the Netherwood Knoll Elementary Cafeteria. Ms. Wood, would you call the roll?
Ms. Feeney?
Present.
Mr. Uphoff?
Present.
Ms. Flanagan?
Present.
Mr. Raymond? Mr. Kraus?
Yo.
Ms. Maidson?
Yes.
Mr. Zott?
Present. Board has a quorum, and Mr. Raymond had notified me this morning that he would not be attending. He is under the weather. I have proof that this meeting has been properly noticed according to Wisconsin open meetings law, and that certification will be here if anyone wants to review that. Our agenda tonight consists of our standard A, B, and C's. Under the action items, we're going to consider final approval of our 2016-2017 budget and the approval of the tax levy.
I move that we approve the agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Anybody wish anything to be removed from the consent calendar? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Also move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, I will note before we vote on that we have one retirement. Karen Taylor, who's been our library media specialist at the Oregon High School, has indicated her intent to retire at the end of the first semester of this year, and we wish her the best. We have 3 generous donations, one from Ms. Elizabeth Conwell in the amount of $900 for Brooklyn Elementary School for use in science technology program for Mr. Bennett. A $30,000 generous donation from the Oregon Girls Fast Pitch Softball Association to be used for J.C. Park, and then the donation from Claire Zock in the amount of $25,000 for use at J.C. Park on the baseball field. So we thank those folks for their extremely generous contributions and donations to the district. And we do not have any contracts or approval or policy, so I think we can do this by voice vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries by unanimous voice vote. Communications from the public. Board Policy 18004 has established a time for the community members to address the board. Is there any member from the community willing or here to address the board? Ms. Wick, have you had anyone sign in with you?
No.
Is there anyone here to address the board from the public? Is there anyone here to address the board? Seeing none, we'll move on to the OEA report. Under item C, is there anyone from the OEA present? No one here, and Tessa is coming and will be late, so we'll try to fit her in if she has a report when she gets here, if that's okay. Moving to action item D1, approval of the budget 2016-2017, and that is Mr. Weiland. And this is the culmination of work that we've been looking at over the last couple months. So Andy, if you give us an overview of the final budget.
Sure. Probably the place to start with that is on your packet. If you go to page, it's actually 28. It's kind of in the corner there on the fold. 29 would be the next page, obviously. That gives you kind of the overview of the budget. It's what I've affectionately called over the years my favorite page. That talks about revenues or fund balance, revenues, expenditures, transfers, and then fund balance at the end of the year. You'll get a good flavor for that. Nothing's really changed from the last time we've talked about this page. It's kind of on a landscape version. This is the side I'm looking at the moment. Basically, starting the year with about $11.4 million in fund balance. At the end of the year, we'll end up with about 10.7. The difference is mostly is all carryover funds that the buildings or departments are carrying over, and a little bit of money associated with the technology infrastructure that we approved a number of years ago. We kind of give ourselves a 0% interest loan for 5 years, and so you see $120,000 on that last, and that kind of that middle area there coming out, and there'll still be $120,000 left for next fiscal year to come out of fund balance to pay for that loan when we improved our infrastructure about 3 years ago now. The other funds that are there, we really won't touch on them much except Fund 27, that's the special education fund. That fund, we basically take any revenues that we get for special education, and that doesn't pay for everything in our special education fund, so then we have to transfer funds from Fund 10 to Fund 27, and you'll see that as a $4.6 million number in the transfers column, and by law that needs to be at a 0 at the end of the year, which is what you see there. Non-referendum debt is our WRS unfunded liability that we've paid, funded, and then also the loan that we took a number of years ago regarding J.C. Park East. So that's those payments for that. Debt service, Fund 39, that's the referendum debt service. So those are paying the bonds for everything that we're doing this year and last year as well. Referendum bonds, those are the funds left over from the bonds that we're paying for. You can see that we started the year with about $35 million in the bank account, and we anticipate having about $7 million left at the end of the year. Total guess on our part, but depends on how the bills come and those types of things. But we'll still be doing construction, quite a bit of construction actually next summer. Food service, you'll see a balanced budget there, starting hopefully at $192,000, or it will start at $192,000 and ending hopefully right around $192,000. You have our Fund 70, our employee trust fund, and our OPEB liability funds. You see those staying pretty constant, going up a little bit as required by law, or not by law, but the Department of Public Construction. We need to continue to fund our OPEB liability a little bit more than what we spend each year in order to be able to claim state aid on that until it's fully funded. And then you see our community ed funds. To the DPI, that's all one fund, but we break it out kind of how we track things, and you can kind of see that at the end of the year we'll have a 0 balance, which is now required by law. The cooperative purchases, that's something that we do. I'm trying to think. It's Carl Perkins grant, which is related to technology. No, it's actually related to Mr. Grandberg's work with School to Work, and us being the administrative agent for a number of districts in around Dane County. So that's the kind of high-level component to the budget. You'll see a number of different schedules in the preceding pages after that. Our revenue budget, as far as comparison for the next several years or previous years, and then this year. You'll see our state aid certification, which we did get just over $20 million as our certification this year, which is up significantly from prior years. You see our revenue limit worksheet. Probably the thing you want to concentrate there is our enrollment. A significant part of our funding is based on enrollment, around 80%, 85%. And so you can see that our enrollment is going up on our 3-year average. That's that on the left-hand side in the green boxes, 3644 is last year's 3-year average, going up to 3678 this year. You'll also notice that we had a little bit of a bump in summer school. That's, if you go to the left of that 3678, you'll see 119 summer school FTE going to 129. Programs being a little bit more offering, and then also kind of the way we are counting things. We've got some clarification from how people have been counting things, and we got a little bit less conservative on how we count those things. So that increased our FTE a little bit. Trying to think if there's anything else. The bottom of this page, you do see a levy rate of 0.01102.819. Typically, you move that decimal 3 places, so it's about 1102 or 1103 if you round up per $1,000. This revenue worksheet does not include the referendum, but we do include that in other places. It's actually the next page that you can see, including the referendum. Our expenditure report then starts there, and you kind of see a typical breakdown. And then we give you the DPI format, both without the referendum and then with the referendum. So it's not the easiest format to read, but it is required, and so that's why we give you the other schedules. Continuing on, I'm on page 40 now. So please, if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. Yeah.
And I apologize, I might have asked this before, but on page 35, I was reading over this, and expenditures and other financing uses, instruction. Could you tell me the difference between undifferentiated curriculum and regular curriculum?
Sure. Typically, undifferentiated is more at the elementary levels, and then regular curriculum is more at the upper levels, high school, that type of thing.
So you split, so that just defines, okay.
Yep.
And thanks.
Yep.
Who knew that undifferentiated meant elementary?
Yeah, and these are definitions that are defined by the Department of Public
Right.
Instruction. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, Andy, I was looking at this, interested to note, particularly both on the revenue and expenditure side, that open enrollment has been an area for significant growth.
Yes, it has been for several years, actually. I think there's actually a whole section which I wasn't going to talk about, but if you have interest, we can touch on that. But yes, open enrollment has been very to our advantage in our school district. It's not true in every district, but in our district it is.
The percentage increases, both in revenue and on the expenditure side for open enrollment, does that reflect a trend as well, or because I was noticing?
Probably better to look at the documents later in the presentation for that. The expenditures reflect students going out of our district. Okay, it's not related to the students that we're educating within our district. Those are mixed in with everything else. But it relates to an expenditure where we're sending money to other districts.
Okay.
So you kind of got to net that out, how much revenue we're bringing in compared to how much expenses we're sending out. All right, page 40 real quickly. It's a lot of numbers, apologize. It's just a sheet I kind of inherited 17 years ago. But it gives you a good feel for 10 years of history as to what the assessed values of all the different municipalities in the school district are, as well as the percentage that they make up of the school district, and then simply taking the levy and distributing that to each of the municipalities, and you can kind of see what's going on. This sheet is again predicated on without the referendum. There is a line on the bottom there that talks about if the referendum would pass, and then we'd have to redo these numbers based on that. The next...
Quick question for you.
Yeah.
I noticed looking at this too, that Fitchburg has been a significant area of growth.
This year significantly, when I think I shared this in the last meeting, I underestimated the impact of Fitchburg's growth was on this year. When I was thinking it was about a 4.5% increase in assessed values. Where I was wrong was Fitchburg. And what's hard about Fitchburg is Fitchburg's such a large geographical area. And there's only a portion of it. There's actually 3 school districts in Fitchburg. And I didn't know, I could see that it had grown, but I didn't know that the majority of the growth actually happened in Oregon School District.
I guess the question I had sort of underlying that is this something that should give us pause in terms of thinking about whether we might want to be looking at possible facilities in the future in terms of...
I don't know if it'd give us pause, but I think it's seeing that the type of growth that's happening in Fitchburg and anticipating that that's probably going to continue. I think that's something we should think about. Yeah. Page 41 is just a simple assessed value as well as mill rate historical graph that we've done every year. So it actually goes back 20 years, so you can kind of see the things. And obviously the interest that I have is looking at from 2009 to 2013, we were in kind of a negative assessed value area, and now we're back into a positive. We have a 3-year positive trend, which is more indicative of the 20 years that we had in the past. So you see a little bit of a graphical representation of the assessed values and as well as the mill rate. Informational section, this is just additional information, how we determine what the budgets are for the schools are on page 43. And then our capital maintenance plan that was approved by the Board of Education, just simply restated there. And then just some graphs on how everything's kind of chopped up on page 45 by category, and then by for all funds, so include all the funds that we talked about before, and then the operating funds, which are just those funds that are included within the revenue cap. So kind of the denominator on the equation is a little bit smaller. And you can see that salaries make up a larger percentage of those dollars that we have control over.
I have a question.
Yep.
I did not I read over the above explanation on this pie chart above, but why is there such a difference in the purchasing service at 15.8 between the two, and one of them is 43.2%, one is 15, and then the salaries are huger on the bottom, and the salaries are a lot smaller on the top.
So again, it's the size of the denominator, right? So it's the bottom number on the equation. And obviously what this shows is whatever's in purchase services. So my guess is, and I find this out for you, but the object that we use for debt service probably is probably in purchase services. So it's just the way we categorize things. And so that made that percentage, that made that piece of the pie larger. That's all funds, so all the different funds that we have, including the debt service fund. But I can get you that answer
Oh,
for
I
sure.
see, so
So the
our
bottom,
purchasing services are quite high in general with
But if
all
you-
funds, but if you separate it out
Yep.
into the operating funds, but it really does tell two different stories. So it seems like me with all the funds that our purchasing services are a lot higher than the salaries. Is that due to the referendum then?
you know, I think you're exactly right with that. Absolutely, that's the referendum funding.
Because we're spending a lot of money on building materials.
It wasn't debt service, it was actually the referendum. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah.
Doesn't the purchasing services also include the Fund 27 special education transfer?
In the past, I think we've subtracted that out so we don't double count
There
it,
you go.
but I'd have to double check on that. It could, but I think Ms. Bateson has a good point. Is if you go back to my favorite sheet, there's over $30 million or right around $30 million that we're going to be spending on the referendum stuff this year, and so that's why that number is significantly larger. Yeah, our referendum fund's going from 35 to 7, so you're at $28 million of purchase services. That if we weren't building the projects right now, we wouldn't have that in there.
Thanks, because that really, the visual really just, disturbed me a little bit in a confusing way, not in a
And as I just demonstrated, sometimes when you're doing things that are unusual, when you look at comparisons, it's you gotta get into this document, which is all the different schedules and worksheets and everything that we did.
Yeah, I'm so
I
sorry.
brought this for visual aid type of thing, and if I had the time, I could have probably gone through there and found it. But so that's exactly.
Okay, well, that clears that up, thank you.
You bet. And so you're going to see that throughout here if we talk about all funds. If we're talking about the operating funds, there's less strange things happening because it's just more typical of what we experience year to year. The rest of the funds is probably more interesting in reading. I will run to the what Mr. Uphoff was talking about, which I'm looking for right now.
Before we move on, another quick
Sure.
question. On page 46, the expenditures by function, does instruction then include salaries? Or is that under general operations?
So salaries would be included in all those areas. So that's more of a
Depending upon-
description of the type of thing
Okay.
that people are doing, or the type of purchase that is being made, the type of expenditure that's being made. So
Gotcha.
a teacher's salary would absolutely be in there, but for instance, my salary wouldn't be. My salary would be in fiscal.
Right. Okay, so
Okay.
that makes a lot of sense, thank you.
Okay. I was going to jump ahead just for the interest of time, but if people have questions to address Mr. Uphoff's question, if you go to page 65, actually, you'll kind of see our enrollment trends, and there's lots of different ways to count students. So kind of talk about this real quickly. Page 64 actually talks about our membership FTE, and that's what we base our enrollment, our revenue limitation is based on, as well as our state aid.
That's the rolling 3-year.
Yep, yep. Now here, you don't see the averaging, but you kind of see actually our history, and then you actually see a little bit of a projection going forward from here. And you'll see from 916, we're at 3673. You'll see that we project actually being kind of steady or a little bit downward. That's if we don't have any inward migration, so we don't additionally have additional students come into our district. So all that's doing is, on the top quadrant there, is projecting those enrollments stagnantly down to the right. So I'll give you an example. Well, and actually, no, she did put migration in here, my bad. So you do see a little bit of growth between the numbers. So if you're, instance, at 8th grade and 9, no, I'm sorry, you'll see on the left-hand side of the columns, you're going to see the migration that happened. And then when you go from 916 to 2017, 2018, then you'll see the roll-up. So if I'm going to look at, for instance, 2017-18, 6th grade, that's a number of 277. If you look at the next year, 2018-19, you see 277 in 7th grade. And then in 8th grade, 277, you see how it goes diagonally down. So all she's doing is rolling the numbers forward when we get to the amount of the enrollment projecting forward. If you go to the left of that number, you actually see what happened over time. So you can kind of chart that, for instance, in 1st grade in 2013, we were at 257, and then in 2014 we were at 260, and then in the next year we were at 262, and then 268 for this year. So you can kind of chart seeing what's going on at our grade levels. So then we tried to chart that information with some, since we do have kind of a growth trend, or inward migration is what we call it. We tried to chart that, and I believe if you look at that orange line, you kind of see what we anticipate to happen. And then she just tried to do like a trend line with a blue line that kind of shows a steady upward growth. Okay. The next sheet on page 65 is the head count number. All we're doing here is kind of showing you that when we added 4K, we don't get to count the students as a full student because they don't go to school full time. So you can kind of see that when we added that, approximately 2009, 2010, we have a deviation of how many students we have from a head count point of view, and what we would have actually had we not added 4K. So this chart's basically trying to show you that we'd be in a different situation had we not added 4K back in 2009, 10, actually 10, 11. Head count is what I was saying before, where we're talking about head count FTE and then head count FTE without 4K. Again, the same types of things happening, but it's a little bit decreased because now we're averaging those 4K students by FTE rather than by person.
Quick question for you.
Yep.
I know Prairie du Chien has had a 3K program for a number of years. I'm wondering if that is something that this district has ever looked at. Is that something for which there's demand, or?
Yeah, I don't know that we've specifically looked at it, other than for our special needs students, which we do provide that for. But other than that, that's not been a topic of conversation that I'm aware of. Enrollment trends, the next page, page 66. We're almost through it, I promise. This is where we get into the open enrollment questions that, or comments that Charles was talking about. And you can kind of see the total residents in is the red bar. Residents out are the white bar. You can see that the white bar has been fairly consistent. The red bar has obviously got a significant upward trend. And then we took a net with a blue line with the triangles in it. And you can see that that's been going at a pretty good pace upward, the net, meaning ins minus outs. This year it was a little different. We didn't see much increase in our ins. And we actually saw a larger increase in our outs. And if you were to really look at that blue line, it actually has a slight downward angle to it. But for the most part, based on the numbers that we're looking at here, it's pretty level. So we are educating about 300 students from other districts, and we're sending out about 100 students to other districts, give or take. And then we talk about more membership, summer school FT, what impact that has on us, and then our 3-year average, which is what drives our revenue and our revenue limitation formula. And you can see that the last 2 years has a really nice upward trend. So we're starting to grow from a residential perspective. Which
Have we ever
is good.
gotten a survey of students who are coming into open enrollment to get a sense of whether the factors that are contributing to the growth?
I don't know that we've done surveys. We have looked at that data a little bit, but it's been a few years. So
And conversely, I was curious, have you interviewed the people who have left?
we haven't done that to my knowledge, but we do see, and I think I mentioned about this last year, one of the things that we saw was a little bit of a spike in our 4K students outs this year, and we kind of have attributed that to there are no real, there's a lack of wraparound service for our 4K students.
What does that mean?
If you get enrolled, if you're enrolled in a program in Oregon, there are some spots available, but there's no place for the student that if I'm going to go there at 8 o'clock in the morning until noon,
Okay.
I don't have a place. Somebody has to come get me at noon
Right.
because I don't have wraparound, is what it's called.
Okay.
And it could be conversely, it could be morning daycare and then going to
So
4K. at
that doesn't mean 100.
No. It was like a 10 additional students that went out this year.
Okay.
Not even, maybe like 7 at that grade level that we haven't seen in the past. And basically because there's a 4K site that closed this year, and it doesn't look like anybody's really
Jumping into
jumped into that area.
Well, it might be kind of interesting down the road when the dust literally settles from all the building, is to maybe talk to the people that have chosen to opt out of the district. I think it would be kind of interesting data.
One of the things that we've attributed it to a little bit is just, for the most part, Oregon is kind of a bedroom community, and a lot of people work in Madison.
Uh-huh.
And so
Well, that makes sense.
we attributed that to, but do we have actual data, or we interview people? No.
Andy, I want to focus just on some of the changes off of the preliminary budget.
Yeah.
One of the things that we talked about, you just talked about membership, and on the original, or on a preliminary budget, you had indicated we're below your preliminary estimation, and then you have a sentence, this decreased our 3-year membership average by 14 FTE, and that's from the preliminary budget,
Correct.
not from last year?
Not from last year.
Okay,
from
because we're
preliminary.
actually up from last year.
Yes, we
Okay, I
are.
just want to make sure that we're clear. And the other thing is we received more equalization aid, and your valuation is higher off the preliminary.
Correct.
And then you averaged out the open enrollment stuff. And one of the things we asked when we were approving the preliminary budget was about contingency funds, and I see that now we have a line item for that, so.
Yep.
we got that.
We do have a $30,000 line item.
Okay.
Just to address what you asked for, or asked about a little bit ago, our 3-year average, our September count went from 3635 last year to 3673, so about an increase of 20, I need to do math.
Well, we were in the 70s last time.
Yeah, I'm not sure what we had projected, but it shows on this sheet that we're going up about 38, I believe, students. So that's a good residential
38.
growth, yep, from last year.
Yeah, I think we were 52 on, or something, 54 from.
Oh, the prior year?
Yeah, our
21 plus
3-year average.
35. Yeah, the 3-year average was going up as well, but just the raw numbers, 2014 to 2015, it looks like we went up about 56 students.
With the final budget, Andy, I know on the levy, we have to approve alternate levies.
Yeah, what I have,
But on the budget, are we approving alternates, or?
yes.
Okay, so how would you want us to frame that this evening if,
So-
go ahead.
Yeah, the white sheets that are very uninspiring and boring that is required by the Department of Public Instruction. I don't have the agenda item how we wrote that, but I thought I put approve both budgets.
It would be the 16-7 original budget as plural, and that's what I wanted
Yeah.
to ask about. So we would be approving
Yeah.
the budget as presented without the referendum being factored in for the override.
You know, and that would be fine, because we always, if you recall, in June, redo the budget.
Yeah.
And so, and I might even do it, we might even bring it back to you sooner than that, just to get that money incorporated into the budget.
So do you want, from a legal standpoint, are we okay just to approve the 16-17 budget as presented without?
Sure.
Is that gonna make any difference if we have to do the levy then with?
Not to my knowledge, but I'm not sure if Gina has a different opinion on that.
Maybe I have talked about this.
For the levy, we haven't talked about the budget necessarily.
Right. I think we're okay because I think we're okay approving the preliminary budget for now. And if things change, then we could come back and do something different. But I think,
do in June typically.
Right.
But we could do it even sooner if we wanted to.
Okay. So if we have a motion to approve the 16-17 budget as presented, it would be the one without the referendum factored in, knowing that we'll have to approve an alternate levy, and if we have to revise our budget as we always do, we would just, in the referendum passes, we would reflect it at that time.
The more important of the two items, just so everybody understands, is the levies. You have to approve both levies, because after November 8th, we have to certify by November 10th. So that if you, which getting ahead of myself a little bit, but if you look at the next agenda item, we actually give the board president the authority to decide which one based on the referendum elections. So we'll be calling Mr. Zock the next day, say, based on the referendum election results, is this the one that you want to submit? And then we'll submit to the township so that they can distribute the levy to the property taxpayers.
Anybody have any questions on the final, or our original, it's not our final, it's our 16-17 original budget? We've done a preliminary cut of that. Any questions from Andy on that? Gwen?
Maybe I should hold this off because it's not directly associated with the budget. I had a question concerning this handout in general.
You can ask Andy that, yeah,
Okay.
that's fine.
I was very curious about the use of just the Badger South Conference as a comparison for the ACT, but comparison, and if we hand this out to prospective homeowners that are looking at real estate, et cetera, I was just curious as why that was chosen as the measurement.
I think that's just a typical thing when you're looking at comparisons. You typically pick your conferences. That's
Okay.
just been a historical.
Because there wasn't, the Badger North wasn't included, and also, you know, the board sometimes when we are dealing with overall or other issues to be discussed, and a lot of it is financial, we often look at Sun Prairie, Verona, Wanakee, and Madison, et cetera, and I was curious if that was just something that this is what we do every year, we just use this other Badger conference.
I believe that's.
It's been a historical one, and it was, I think, just chosen because it's the conference we're in. Or the
Okay.
Southern that we'll work with other than
Yep. Yeah,
Uh,
Charlie?
Frequently, Andy, on the capital maintenance plan, I noticed there are a number of places where there's items for carpet replacement. Is that gonna be replacing carpet with new carpet or with tile?
It's mostly with the tile, such as the material that's below you. It's called a marmoleum type product. There are a couple places, offices typically, that will do some carpet. Libraries, we do carpet, but mostly we do.
My assumption is, from what we've previously discussed, there may be some maintenance savings.
Over time,
Over
absolutely.
time.
Yeah, especially, we're, for instance, not doing any VCT anymore, like what's out in the hallway over there. That's a lot of maintenance work, stripping and waxing and those types of things.
Chris, did you have any questions?
Yeah, I mean, I just have a question about the building carryover budgets, and if we're working on reducing those, or, you know, as you look at by school, there's quite a variance with some of the schools.
Yep.
And so I just would like you to comment on that.
So one of the things that I've found over time is specifically when you have new staff in those roles, there's a tendency to be very, very conservative with spending. and then it takes them a couple of years to kind of feel comfortable with things, and then they spend those down. That's been my experience over time. That's all I can really comment on at this point in time. But I know Mr. Pliner and I have had some conversations regarding that fund balance. Last year was his first year at that building,
Yeah.
and he's confided in me that he feels like that will be coming down significantly this next year.
Any more, Krista? Dan?
Andy, and forgive me because I can't remember the line item or even the area of the budget. I think it was in operating funds that there was an opportunity, I think, for us to spend about $30-some thousand last year because we didn't zero out the budget. We don't get to get that revenue this year in the same amount. Do you recall within the last couple of months when we discussed something like that? Where the state requires us to have a zero budget at the end of the year, but we didn't. So
That could have been our community ed funds.
Community ed.
So that's why we're kind of technically under levying this year to use up that fund balance. But if you look at that, my favorite sheet, you see that it's a zero at the end of this year. So basically what we're saying is, okay, there's some fund balance left over. We're gonna under levy in that area because we're required to use up those funds to get to a zero balance at the end of the year. So you could argue that the community ed levy is maybe underrepresented a little bit this year in order to take care of that balance.
Okay. Were there, is there anything that we could do to either bring that budget in line or make sure that we use the money that we do get? Because I'm guessing that we can always use more money.
Sure. Now, community ed is kind of a different animal a little bit. It's not really to run the school district. It's to run programming and those types of things. What happened there is partially, I can't blame it on all this, but we do have like a new after-school enrichment and program that we're running that was in a pilot phase last year, and it didn't get started quite as early as we had anticipated it would. There was also, I think we were trying to do a new activity for adults, which was disc golf. It had some significant capital purchases that needed to happen. We were working with actually the town of Oregon and found out that we thought we had a good location, and then kind of middle to late to the school year, we found out that the town wasn't interested in us doing that. So those funds didn't get spent. I think Mrs. Miller is looking at alternative places to do maybe a smaller disc golf range now. I'm not sure if that's what they call it or not, but that's what's going to happen. But the way that balance is going to be taken into account is we'll just under levy in the next agenda item to basically take care of that. But those types of things kind of can happen, but the law now requires us to under levy when we do have those balances.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks, Andy. Great job again.
You bet.
Yay.
Thanks. Full credit goes, a good amount of the credit goes to Cara Newton, who puts this packet together, and you could tell that we tried to use the right colors and fonts. So she made a real effort at that this year.
Barb, any questions?
Just a question about the Badger proficiency pages, page 9. So the Badger, this is referring to the, what replaced the other exam, statewide exam?
I'm
What do you call
gonna
it?
just keep looking past me to the person in the back there.
And Leslie, are we gonna talk about this with our building reports a little bit, the data from here?
I don't really need to talk about,
Yeah.
what I wanna say is, if this is the first year for the Badger exam, it'd be nice if somewhere it said that, and why there isn't a comparison with years past, which I assume is why there isn't a comparison if this is the first year.
It was the first and only year.
Okay.
So KC to
Right.
1 year Badger, and now it's the forward.
Okay, the other
So-
thing, I'm just gonna say, you don't need to explain it to me, but on page 10, those charts at the bottom, I have no clue what those are about, so maybe you can
And-
do something with that.
And I have to apologize a little bit. One of the things that this document was designed to do is called a Meritorious Budget Award. MBA is the type of thing, and it's basically formatted after kind of exemplar examples of what a budget document would look like, and that's basically actually it's an international standard. We've been trying to, without spending the money, we've been trying to model our document after that. So we take information that Leslie probably has seen, but not in this format, and include it within our budget document so that if a person grabs our budget document, they also get information regarding test scores and that type of information as well.
Yeah, no, it makes sense to include it, I just, a little bit, why it's called Badger, what that actually means for somebody who doesn't know, and then some charts at the bottom on page 10.
One thing, folks, this was something new that we started a few years ago. It's an excellent community resource, but if anybody has any comments about it, it really isn't part of the adoption of the budget, but get them to us so that,
We can make it.
yeah, we can move through
All I
it.
gotta say is I thought that it was really good, and I really appreciated the pages 19 through 25, and I wish that, you know, it's a really good reference manual too.
It is terrific. I saved mine, and then they're my go-to source for data when I have a chance to do so.
So thank you, Cara and Andy.
You bet. Pass it on.
Yeah. Tessa, you understand all the numbers and data?
Totally.
Yeah, okay. Any questions? No. Anybody have any questions about this? Otherwise, I think it's time for a motion to approve the 2016-27 original budget that is without the referendum dollars incorporated into there.
I so move.
Is there a second to that?
Second.
Okay, got that, Jamie?
Yep.
First and second, is there any further discussion on the budget from anyone? Andy, just again, thank you. It's a long, hard process, and to get where we are, it takes a lot of work, and we appreciate it, so thanks.
Glad I don't have to do
Yep.
it.
Ms. Wick, would you call the roll?
Ms. Mason?
Yes.
Mr. Kraus?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes.
Ms. Feeney?
Yes,
Mr. Uphoff?
Yes,
Mr. Zock?
Yes, motion carries 6-0. Congratulations, Andy. We got a budget for starting in July of this year, and it's like beginning of November.
Weird the way things work sometimes.
Amazing ways of Wisconsin school finance, isn't it?
Yeah.
The next item on the agenda is again Andy's, and it's the approval of the tax levy, and that flows out of our original budget. And Andy, if you do a brief presentation on that.
And there's not really much to say here. All it is you are approving two levies, and you can see in the motion that, as I mentioned before, we'll be looking for direction from Mr. Zock after November 8th to figure out which levy to pass on to our township. So that's all done electronically, and we have until November 10th to do that, and then they take that information, which is passed on to them, I think, by the Department of Revenue, and prepare tax bills for everybody. So they're approving a levy without the 1.5 and with the 1.5 million at this point.
I move that we approve the two tax levies as handed out in the, with the board packet, and we allow the board president to choose which one we submit after the November 8th election and referendum results are in.
A second to that motion.
second.
Charlie seconds that. A comment, Andy. The levy without the referendum is actually going down this year by $750,000, and then even with $1.5 million, that only increases then the levy by another $750,000. So it's not the levy is not increasing $1.5 million with this. Okay, and actually, even if the referendum would pass, our mill rate would be lower than last year's.
That's correct.
Okay. Any other discussion or comments regarding the levy motion on the table? Seeing none, Janie, would you call the roll?
Mr. Kraus?
Yes.
Mr. Uphoff?
Yes,
Ms. Feeney?
yes,
Ms. Flanagan.
Yes.
Ms. Mason.
Yes.
Mr. Zock.
Yes, motion carries by 6-0 vote. Thanks, Andy.
You bet, thank you.
Okay. At this time, Tessa, you missed your turn, but we knew you were gonna be late, so, this is a chance for you to give us a little update on high school. And last time we talked about you were gonna do a goal-setting thing, and
Yes.
would you tell us how that went?
Actually, I brought, I put together a little sheet of what we discussed and everything, so
Awesome.
kind of our plans for this year. Just pass these. So basically it just goes in order from 9th grade through 12th, so it's double-sided, so 9th and 10th are on the front, and then 11th and 12th are on the back. And so how this retreat worked was, it was 2 weeks ago on Wednesday. We had the 9th graders come in for a 90-minute session, 10th graders 90-minute session, and then 11th and 12th as well for their 90-minute sessions. And we kind of just brainstormed and kind of goal set for this year. So what the 9th graders came up with was a fundraiser. Their main thing for this year is going to be a fundraiser for Camp Kesem. And if you don't know what that is, it is a nationwide recreational camp that supports children through their parents' cancer. And actually a couple of students in the 9th grade, they actually attended this camp, and they really loved it, and we want to create a fundraiser for this to help fund students to be able to go to this camp and benefit the camp. So this fundraiser would include a bake sale, and I believe they're doing something at the November 18th basketball game, and it's like a minute to win a bucket thing, and so you pass around this bucket, and I believe DECA did it as well at the football game. They actually raised $600 for the Muscular Dystrophy Association. So it's very similar to what they did. And some other ideas that the 9th graders came up with were the Giving Tree, which is another it's not a fundraiser, it's donations and such for the people in need, and Pi Day, which will be in March 14th, and that's a food drive for OHS, or for the Oregon Food Pantry. And this is kind of like a fun event that the kids get to do. So they pick out 5 teachers that volunteer to do this, and their names are put on specific buckets, and each can of food that a student donates, they get a slip, they get to put it in one of the teachers' names and buckets, and then on Pi Day, we draw names, and whoever name is on the slip, they get to pie this teacher in the face on Pi Day, but then all of the canned foods go to this, the Oregon Food Pantry. So it's kind of a fun way to mix it up, and then a Ringing of the Bells and Operation Joy, which are also fundraisers. And then 10th grade, I talked about this last meeting, we decided to do the Fairy Tale Pancake Breakfast again, and so that will be in March. So student council members will dress up as characters from fairy tale books and serve breakfast for families, and hopefully all of these proceeds will go to the Leukemia Lymphoma Society, so that's the goal right now. That's our set organization. And then a canine breakfast, I really don't know much about this. I know that it supports Oregon Police Department, but I don't know much about that to report. And then if you flip this, the 11th and 12th graders kind of decided to tag team for all of their projects this year. So we're going to be hosting another winter dance like we have been the past 2 years. This will take place on Friday, January 27th. It will be on campus, and it's just going to be like a casual thing, just sort of to the students to have a fun activity to do. And then the December before, so this December then, we're doing a winter pep assembly, so then we're gonna have a week of dress-up days, and so Monday will be pajama day, Tuesday winter character day or whiteout, Wednesday dressed like a blizzard day, I'm not really sure what that is, but Thursday, and then ugly sweater day, and that's actually our last day of the school week. And then we're planning on having this event called Powder Buff. It'll take place on school grounds in the gym, and it's a volleyball tournament for junior and senior boys at OCAmedia, and so that will be kind of fun. Then for Teacher Appreciation Week, we're planning on serving the teachers Little Bunny popcorn again, which they really enjoyed last year, and then different Panther Vision segments on each department, and just kind of appreciating what they do and such. And then I actually came up with these last two items. So I discussed having a student and staff member of the month because I think that it's really important for people to be valued and appreciated for what they do. So hopefully there will be voting through advisory, and the students will vote for staff members at OHS, and then the staff members will vote for students. So each month there'll be a different teacher and student that are kind of like honored. And my goal is that this isn't just for this year. This is for all of the future years to come. So it's kind of like an actual like honor to receive this award because you're being valued and appreciated by either your staff or your students. And then this is the thing that I'm actually most excited about. I've created this should hopefully be in April. I want it to be the week of Earth Day, and that's April 22nd. That's the end of the week. And so I've named it Let's Make a Difference Week, and the goal is to basically create a sense of involvement within the community because I actually believe that that's the most important thing that we should be doing this year as student council. So what we would do is partner with ECOS, which is an environmental club at OHS, and OHS Outreach, which is a volunteer club. And I want to host a senior citizen prom, and it is a possibility. It's super, super cute. I would host it at headquarters, and the senior citizens from the high-rise apartments, which is right across the street from headquarters, they would they would walk over. It wouldn't be very late at night, obviously, but they would just.
Know.
You never know.
You never know.
I don't know.
I have some stories about that place.
So that's one of the projects that will happen throughout this week, and then I want the students to volunteer with either food pantries. So I volunteer regularly at the River Food Pantry, which is on the east side of Madison, and that's a really great one that I definitely recommend to all of our students. And I had in that meeting, and Oregon Food Pantry, obviously, and then. We would partner with ECOS to do a honeysuckle pull, like the 8th grade, I believe it's 8th grade or 7th grade students do at the Lerner Park in Oregon, and then possibly a highway cleanup. So basically the goal here is just kind of to get involved and try and improve the community as much as possible. So that's kind of what I have for this year, and you updated, I guess.
That's an ambitious agenda. Yeah. Anybody have any questions or comments for Tessa? Great, terrific. Thank you very much. Okay. We're going to skip over discussion items for a minute. Actually, committee reports, policy, Barb, you guys are on hold.
Right.
Yeah.
Our next meeting is going to be December 6th.
Okay, and Vision Steering Committee, Jeff's not here, so we'll have him report next time. Informational items then, Brian, referendum and 2016 update.
A couple of quick items on the November 8th referendum. Last week we completed over 40 community meetings or touches, and I hope you had an opportunity to read Steve's guest editorial last week. I thought it was outstanding, sharing information about the November 8th referendum and background on why it's come to pass. Last week we had 6 meetings for the referendum. I also made a real short presentation at last week's Oregon Chamber meeting on Thursday afternoon. We've been working with the Donovan Group on 2 things, and I know you've received this already. The district referendum newsletter went out last week, and we still have some available. In the event anyone you know would like a couple of copies, or if you'd like to pick up a couple of copies to have them available to pass out, you're welcome to do that. Our next project, Joe and Becky from his office have finished our postcard, and the postcard will be mailed dropped off at the post office next Monday or Tuesday, and that should be out November 1st, 2nd, or 3rd. Joe and I also worked on a final script for our 2-minute video that we're going to film tomorrow morning to put on the website. Video real similar to one we used in terms of not content but process, in terms of what we did in 2014, and hopefully that video will be up and operational in the next couple of days. So that's where we are in terms of our referendum update. I'll just jump right into superintendent report. Steve was able to make it to the Brooklyn Fall Fest last Monday, which was also an open house. We had about 100 community members, plus minus, and we had these marvelous students that were our tour guides. And I will send both directions a copy of our self-guided tours. And of course, you are welcome to visit Brooklyn anytime. We won't, well, we'll have 500 kids there, but we won't have tour guides set up. And you'll notice these were the 5 areas which match to our referendum. Area number 1, secure entrance and offices. Area 2 were the 2 new kindergarten classrooms. Area 3, the orchestra and music room. Area 4, the updates that we made to the libraries. And Area 5 is the multi-purpose cafeteria. The kids did just an outstanding job serving as tour guides, and from the conversations I had with parents and community members and students, it was just a great, great time.
Yeah, Mike Dillis and I, the president of Findorf, and I got a tour from one of the groups. It was hilarious. They did such a good job. And he was so excited to see them bragging about the school that they built. So
The kids were very excited.
they were really excited. And they got pizza, right, Carrie?
And pizza in the booths Friday,
Well,
that's
that-
the big deal, the seating.
This past Thursday night, we had a couple of WIA events at the high school. First, volleyball was inside, which was significantly warmer than being outside. I had an opportunity to stop at both, and we hosted our first ever WIA soccer tournament game on the new soccer complex, and it was packed with people in spite of the fact that it was just a little chilly. And I met someone who wanted to say hi to all the school board members and all the administrators. You will recognize this name, Heather Sveum. Dr. Sveum was back, and she spotted me out of the crowd and came over, and we had an opportunity to visit. Her son is a senior and happens to be playing soccer this year, and she just wanted to pass on good words and good thoughts from the great country of Africa, which is where she's been for the last 4 months, and she's heading back in a couple of days. Tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock, Frank Caruso contacted me last week, and he would like to film another construction tour at Oregon High School and Oregon Middle School. I guess according to the Nielsen ratings that WOW gets. The last tour that he filmed with me had such high ratings, they would like to do another one. So it's going to be a busy day. And I also wanted to say thank you to Jacob. Jacob has been spending a lot of time with us.
He has.
Actually, in a 5-day period, I think he spent 3 nights with us. He filmed both of our community meetings for the referendum, which were not, there wasn't great attendance, but he was able to shoot some film and show information. I'm not sure if it's been up on WOW. I've been too busy to see it.
It's on
but
YouTube.
It is? Oh, fantastic. And he was also at the Brooklyn Open House. So he is a busy young guy, and he spent a lot of time with us in the last couple of weeks. And then lastly, today we hosted the National Equity Project workshop, and Leslie and Candace and Shannon are our 3 co-chairs, and we brought in about 50 to 60 people. I'm forgetting the exact amount. It was real similar to the workshop we had in June, where we brought staff from all across the district. This time it was a little shorter. It was only a couple of hours, and this is one of 3 more that we're going to host this year, all in preparation so that when we have our board administrative workshop next May, we can give you an update and our plans for what we're going to do with the educational equity piece for next year. So with that, I will stop unless any of you have questions.
Any questions of Brian? Go ahead.
On the weekly thing on the school board, it talked about starting the foundation for Oasis in, sorry, I can't talk. In relationship to the weather, how's that looking?
I was there last week, and they have poured the footings, which are like 4 or 5 feet underground, and then they poured the wall, to start the brickwork.
Thank you very much.
So it's out of the ground and it's all framed up. If you drive the back part, you can get a really good sense of how large Oasis will be. And I'll say the open windows that were on the first floor will now become part of the hallway, so that's all. I know they don't use drywall, they use a drywall-like project, but that's all complete. So we are off and running, with Oasis.
There's, the foundations are in, and as of this morning, they were starting to work on.
Yeah, I meant to
putting
drive
it up.
by, but I didn't have time.
It's starting to go.
And you got my email about the transference of a few things from Oasis? The memorial bench and all that?
Oh, yes,
Okay.
yes.
So that's on the radar now?
Andy's,
It's on our radar.
I passed that off to Andy and he knew exactly what you were talking about, and we're trying to come up with a plan, just to bring everyone in the loop. Apparently, a number of years ago, there was a memorial garden for Jack Mitchell, one of our science instructors, and that memorial garden.
A dedication, he hasn't passed.
Oh, okay, thank you. Sorry for that correction. I do not know
That's
Miss.
important.
Just make sure,
Yes.
yeah.
I do not know Mr. Mitchell. It was before my time, but a dedicated garden, and it's sat approximately right where the two-story academic wing is. So we have kicked around a couple of ideas of where we could relocate the dedicated garden. And if you haven't had an opportunity to look at,
And that, Cal Calloway.
the interior part of the academic wing, Findorf has that completely, the courtyard, they have the courtyard completely finished. So we could potentially put that dedicated garden right there. So Andy's been talking with Jim, and we're going to come up with a plan and make sure that that happens.
Thank you.
Good. Agenda for our meeting on November 14th. We've got a draft in front of you, which one of the things that Brian and I worked on for this meeting was the student achievement reports needed just a little bit more incubation time, and so we bumped it till then. And so we put on our student expulsion one for tonight. So we'll come back with that on the 14th. And then the co-curricular task force report will also be that evening.
Yes.
Yep.
Gina, that's correct, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then by that time, we'll have our election results, and we'll get the result on that. Any action items that we contemplate?
Right now, we don't have any action items.
Okay. Any issue from the board member, any items that board members want on they can think of at this point? Okay. With you, Jim?
Just a question, and really probably directed to Barb. I know we have a policy committee meeting scheduled for early November, and just wanted to see if we could have on that agenda something dealing with the committees.
Actually, our next meeting is going to be in December, but it was my intention that that would be on the agenda,
Okay.
the committee discussion. Yeah.
One of the things, Brian, that we might want to think about is whether we have a second meeting in December. I'm not sure where that fits. I didn't look.
Yeah, we were planning on canceling that meeting.
Yeah, so at some point we'll need to get that on as an action item to cancel, probably cancel that. Anybody else on agenda for the 14th of November? God, it's hard to believe we're in November. Okay. With that, that covers all items on the agenda tonight except our work session, which we're going to have one on student expulsions. Starting into now, I think what we'll see is always in the second semester, a greater increase in expulsions as we move through this school year. So we thought it would be a good time just to go through and review what has been established protocol between the board, or at least understanding between the board and administration on what comes before us and how it comes before us. I think we haven't done that for 4 or 5 years. So it would be a good time to do that now. Our expectations are going no more than an hour, so we'll finish about 8:30 at the latest to kind of focus our time. So more work session, more informal process at this point. And sometimes we video, sometimes we don't. So if you've got places to go, you can sign off, but these tend to be more informal.
Okay.
Okay? Brian, you're gonna take the lead in sort of organizing the conversation as we go through.
Yeah, just to get us started, I'll hand out a documented, I would invite all of the administrators to come out of those really expensive seats where you're at, and you are welcome to join us so you can be part of this conversation too. So if you want to move up, maybe that first row, and
Steve, I'm wondering, just a point of order, whether it might be appropriate to adjourn to a committee of the whole, which would really structurally provide a lot more flexibility in terms of having a conversation and including non-board members in the conversation.
Well, we don't have the ability to do that because it's not posted as such, and we've typically done it as just a discussion item. At this point, it's not noticed as action item, so I think we can effectuate the same purpose through this way. I'm not gonna run it like an official board meeting. It'll be more of a conversation type thing.
Steve, do you want everybody to have one of these?
Yes, that was
to the
my-
extent they can. And I think the purpose of this is not to dictate to the board how they're going to decide any particular board expulsion matter, because that's got to be decided on the merits in closed session with that. But it's more of talking about our processes and getting an understanding as to how we proceed. So, Brian.
Yeah, I am personally delighted to be able to have this conversation. Not that I like student expulsion hearings, because I'm not a fan of them, but for about 1.5 years, we've had this on the parking lot to have a conversation with the board. And under item number 1, that's really just some background information for all of you, and I'll walk through that real quickly. I think the most important part comes under item number 2, which is, board dialogue on expulsion process and recommendations. And one thing that Steve mentioned, which I think is really critically important from a board and from an administrative perspective, if we bring an expulsion recommendation to the board, it really would be inappropriate for us to bring a recommendation that we know you're going to approve, which kind of sounds unusual. But if we bring only a recommendation that we know you're going to approve, it really doesn't allow for the process, the parents and the family to have an opportunity to share their side. And there's no harm, and no one has hurt feelings on the administrative team if you change the recommendation that we make. That's a policy level discussion. Charles, I'll get back to you in a second. That's a policy level discussion that really you have to do independent. So the purpose of what I have under item number 1 is just some conceptual agreements that we've had with previous boards and that we've been carrying forward. And the first conceptual agreement is something that was new to me when I came to the district, because a lot of districts do not have a AODA offense 1 and AODA offense 2. It would be common practice in most districts, if there's an AODA offense, that automatically goes to the board. Having lived in both environments where the first AODA offense goes to the board, and here we have offense 1 and offense 2, I much prefer having 2 AODA offenses and then the second one going to the board. One of the areas that's an exception to that is the sale and or distribution of AODA. If a student is selling some AODA related materials, that has always gone directly to the board. That was in my inheritance bag when I came to the district. I think that's an appropriate item to take directly to the board. Jim and I had a conversation today. Our approach has been, if you're the buyer on school property, that hasn't necessarily gone directly to the board. So, if you have some feedback for us on that, that would be great. When I came to the district over a decade ago, we used to bring every knife incident to the school board. And that was a knife incident. It wasn't if you brought a bagel knife to cut your bagel at lunch. Those never came to the school board. But if you had a Swiss Army knife, if you had your favorite pocket knife that you brought to school, knowingly to share with your friend and to show with your friend, that went to the board. Now, in probably the last 8 years, we've evolved to a point where the only knife that comes to the board, or the only student expulsion hearing that comes to the board for a knife-related incident is if a student makes a threat associated with that. Weapons, and there's a state law definition, and Gina can tell you all about that. I'm just going to focus in on what I call a firearm or a look-alike. If a student brings a gun on school property, that has always gone directly to the school board. I can't recall in my decade plus of being here where we've ever had a weapon violation. I will tell you, in a previous district, I had a couple, and they always related to students driving what was often their truck to school, and they were going hunting after school, and they had a shotgun in their truck. Again, not in the Oregon School District, but in a previous district. Those always go to the board if it's a firearm issue. One of the things that we try to do is evaluate each discipline-related matter, and each discipline-related expulsion has sometimes similar facts, but always something unique and somewhat different. What we will do internally is also look at equity issues, because as you know, equity is one of our top 5 values. We want to make sure that whatever decision we make within a discipline decision, if you were to look across our student body, we would treat all of our students in a similar sort of way. So sometimes you might see a recommendation that doesn't make sense. We're balancing that equity criteria in the background to make sure that we haven't treated any of our students differently for similar type of expulsion matters. We always put together an administrative recommendation, and that's usually put together by the principal. I'm looking at Jim and Shannon because for the most part we've had them at the middle school and the high school. The principals put together their best effort on that administrative recommendation. And you know, or you may not know, 15 years ago there wasn't an option for conditional reinstatement. When you were expelled, back in my day in the late 70s, if you were expelled, you were out of school. There was no option to return. It's probably more than 15. It's probably
more
closer
than
to
15.
20, right?
No, yeah.
20 years ago, the state legislature changed that law and gave school boards the authority to conditionally reinstate students. I think that's a key provision in state law, and it's a key part that Oregon school boards have used over the years to conditionally reinstate. And for those of you that have been through the expulsion process, you know there are 3, 4, 5 different conditions that we will require, that will place in an administrative recommendation. We also know that there have been some questions from board members on why do we expel to age 21, and Jim's happy to share information on that. We tend not to get age 21 expulsions at the middle school, although that doesn't preclude the fact that we may at some day have an age 21 expulsion at the middle school. And Jim, did you want to share a few words on what would bring us to make a recommendation for to age 21?
If we get to a point in when we reinstate a student past the age of 18 and we continue to work towards helping them meet their graduation goals, and there are reinstatement criteria that would apply until their date of graduation or until 21, when they're no longer eligible for a public education. So it gives us the opportunity to try to keep engaged with folks, but also to keep criteria alive that would be important for them to have the opportunity to demonstrate compliance with whatever order comes from our board.
Remember that to age 21, or that expulsion that goes for 2 or 3 school years has really the net effect of serving as a probationary period, so to speak, where a student will be reinstated when they meet criteria 1 through 5, but they still have that probation in essence hanging over their head in the event that there is a material breach, not just a breach of one of the conditions, but a material breach. And then it's not a board decision anymore, it's an administrative decision, and it is one of the most painful decisions that we have to make if there's a material breach to an expulsion order, because we sign off on that student no longer being a student in the Oregon School District, and that is a painstaking process and one that we take great care with. Charles, I know you have a question.
Brian, you had raised the question in terms of the appropriateness of making a recommendation, administrative recommendation, and at what point in the process that should occur. And it seemed to me that in the spirit of what you, I think, were suggesting, it might make sense to have expulsion hearings in a 2-stage format, where the first would just be evidentiary, so discussion, meeting with the student and with the parents to gather all the information, and deferring any recommendation until that initial process had been completed. That might provide a better way of keeping some balance.
Let me jump in, because we've got history on that. I've done 170 of these. It's been way too many over the years. And we evolved from expulsions as the punishment for violating rules to a restorative type of program, where the focus of that was really to figure out what was going on in the child's life, and try to remedy that in the context of an expulsion hearing. Because after you hear 15 to 20 of them, you start seeing patterns. And I'm seeing nods in there, and you get to realize that the behavior that you're seeing that's violative of the rules is really an outgrowth of something that we might be able to fix. Not always, but oftentimes we can. And so we started more into a restorative approach. And that included looking at our AOD approach and going to a first and second step of AODA, where we do a suspension and some treatment options for the first offense, where a lot of districts don't and didn't. I think more are now doing a first step, but back in the early 2000s, a lot of districts were 1 and out, and we were moving to something different. And then the second, and not being referred to the board for expulsion, but only if there was selling in purchasing. And so we reached an agreement as we were walking through these with administration on saying, okay, we got our policy where we do first and second AODA. Here's when we want to see it referred to the board. Here's when we don't. We're in the current model and doing it that. That's the bulk of stuff we saw was AODA and a lot of self-medicating issues. And we had a whole bunch of knives, and we finally said, look, we're getting sick of seeing, the mistaken pocket knife in there coming in, unless we have some sign that maybe it was there because potential use, that we don't want to see it, and you guys deal with it on a discretionary basis. Weapons, we don't see it. Conduct stuff, we don't see a lot of it. By and large, it's AODA stuff. We had a couple fights, but that usually goes suspension route. And every once in a while, a total disruptive child that just has to be removed because we can't keep them in the context of the school. So we started keeping track of our data on it, and Janie and I worked on that, and we've done 2 presentations as a district at WASB on our restorative approach. The last one was 2 or 3 years ago with Beth Cox and who else was there? I was there, Beth Cox and Cynthia D. Camelli also presented both on our truancy and on our expulsion and our restorative stuff. Even when we got expulsions to us on the AODA stuff, we did conditional reinstatement. We were recovering, kids were graduating at a 2/3% rate. So we thought that was really good. That we were able to get, solve the problem without letting the kid go. In terms of how we proceeded, we were getting tired of having really long expulsion hearings where we spent a lot of times on the facts. And so we went to a session, 15 years ago, Janie, and we saw, I think New Richmond they do a pre-expulsion conference. And we created a form based upon what they had. And so that's what you guys use now, is they sit down with the parents or guardians and the child and walk through the factual events, and they ask specifically whether they acknowledge the rule violation of the conduct or not, and I think almost universally they admit the conduct. And so we don't spend a lot of time with it. Most of the expulsion hearings that we've had over the years focused on that second part, Charlie, okay? What's going on here and how can we help, and not spending a lot of time on that. So I think we do try to sift. We do sift a lot more than we did a long time ago on stuff, and the administration has sifted with it. And I don't think you guys have a recommendation in mind. You have to tell me if I'm correct, until after the pre-expulsion conference.
Correct.
And I'm still struck, because I represent boards in expulsion hearings, where the parents are hearing for the first time kind of what the administration's thinking, and it's really adversarial, and they tend to be really ugly if you don't have that. I'm continually struck by the non-adversarial nature of our expulsion hearings by and large, and more of the problem-solving approach that goes on, not with us as board members, but between the tables. Charlie?
Yeah, but my concern raised in part the experience we had last year, where there was an expulsion, a recommendation for expulsion with a young girl who, as the information was brought forward, had had a history for a couple of years of having issues with her fights or other kinds of things. And my concern was that it sort of comes attention to the only board at the point which there's a recommendation to expel, when it seemed to me that there were lots of indicators that there should, and I'm sure there were, efforts for earlier intervention to try to address those issues. My biggest concern is that
There were numerous.
yeah, my biggest concern is that expulsion seems to be, when you've got a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and it's looking at maybe not just expulsion, maybe intervening in terms of a broader range of disciplinary options in addition to or beyond expulsion.
Well, I remember that one, Charlie,
Yeah.
because there was a whole lot of
Yeah.
stuff there. I mean, there were suspensions, there was
2
discussions.
years at least, yeah.
I don't remember an expulsion where the administration hasn't been intimately involved with the child in trying to rectify behavior before it gets to the board in terms of continuing conduct.
Well, I'm not suggesting that, but my concern is the point at which the board gets involved or is made aware of it, it seems to be pretty far down the road and without maybe an opportunity for more conversation, discussion with the administration in terms of what's been tried, what options might be available. And the restorative justice part is clearly, I think, a significant important part of that. But I guess what I would like to do is maybe have a broader discussion focusing not just on the expulsion, but on, again, whether the broader range of options available to administrators and to the district in terms of addressing issues of behavior.
Why don't you share some of your ideas now?
Well, I think the restorative justice piece is a very significant one, but the other thing that struck me is that often one of the most significant influences on students and behavior is their peers. And trying to identify ways in which, and it relates to some extent to the issue we've had about random drug searches and things like that. My concern with the random drug searches was that it's addressing a symptom rather than some of the underlying issues in terms of why kids are involved in using drugs in the first place. And trying to really engage and involve students more as part of the solution in terms of thinking about how we might, as a district, be more creative, more supportive in terms of having conversations with students and with parents, opening up opportunities for more conversations between students and their parents, maybe providing some opportunities, some resources for bringing parents in to sort of help provide some techniques or some tools or things that they might be able to use in terms of engaging their students in conversations about some of the issues, some of the concerns that they might have relating to drugs or other kinds of behavioral issues. I don't have a list at this point, but I think it would be a useful conversation to have. And it's a conversation I would really like to involve students themselves in terms of, you know, helping maybe us understand what kind of things they might feel would be most effective in both heading off some negative kinds of behavior, but also making clear that there are consequences for actions and finding ways in which that could be effectively communicated with students so that they feel part of the solution, more or perhaps more a part of the solution than they are presently.
I think Jim or Leslie, or can you talk about kind of how you're dealing with students before, and Shannon, before they get through the expulsion process, what kind of steps they undertake, you guys undertake? I'm thinking specifically about bringing parents in the loop and Cynthia DiCamelli and what she does as well.
We bring, the time in which we bring students forward in the expulsion process, we believe we no longer have discretion. We no longer have discretion, that we bring to the board things that we're expected to bring to the board due to policy, procedure, and past practice. We appreciate the fact that we have a two-layered approach so that our pre-expulsion conference, I often like to explain to parents, we like to believe that this is an expulsion prevention conference, really, that it is our intent to provide whatever supports necessary to help you be successful and to clearly delineate the important steps that the student must also own in order to stay out of the process. And so it's really an individualized approach depending on what the situation is. And again, everything goes through a pre-expulsion unless it is a large offense that would rocket. We still would have a pre-expulsion, but in most cases we have the opportunity to set the stage for regular meetings. I have a student that I meet with a couple of times a quarter to kind of review expectations. We have students that we connect with counseling or support services. Our student assistance program coordinator meets regularly with students as determined through pre-expulsion conferences. Counselors will meet with students as deemed necessary and a part of their plans that emerge out of pre-expulsion conferences. We have engaged students with peer tutors or community-based tutors if we believe that that is sort of a tangential academic support that will help engage them to learning. So there's been a number of things that we've done. I don't know if somebody else wants to dive in.
Let me ask a real quick question, because I know obviously there's some confidentiality issues that have to be addressed when you're dealing with potential expulsion. I don't know how those would be adequately addressed, but again, coming back to the question raised earlier, is sort of thinking about, are there ways in which the students themselves might be more actively involved proactively in dealing with potential expulsion issues to head that off as an option, to really, I think that would be an interesting conversation to have with students.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that comes to mind for this discussion is bringing back the conversation of mental health initiative. And part of this is when we're at a expulsion meeting, we read over some of the behavioral reports that go on and on and on. And I often find that sometimes there's a lot of them, and some of them are pretty minuscule. I mean, you know, like being tardy to class, and they get written up. But what's presented there is that they have a ton of them, a lot, many, 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 and through many years. And I think that those are indicators of that this child needs some serious help. In that's where I'm going with that mental health thing. I don't know, you know, how we can address that. I'm just saying that I find that, again, I know that there are things in place, Jim, and all of you do a really good job at it, but I've seen some documents that are like, wow, there's a ton of them. And how did it get that far? And so there's some disenfranchisement with the child, is what comes to my mind, and perhaps we need to, one more thing on the plate of administrators and teachers is to, you know, begin to be more aware of that so that they can access mental health opportunities so that it doesn't come to the point of expulsion. Does that make sense? I know it's a long route through what I'm trying to say.
The data is what the data is, and we would be very happy to deliver you a year of no expulsions and thumbs up for sure. The data will never show us necessarily what interventions have successfully avoided students from getting to the board, because we have found the right supports, and our building intervention teams, or our student support teams, and our counselors, and the community partnerships that we have that really are reflected in our calendars and are really a strong part of our day. We believe there are a lot of success stories that never make the data because they just, you know, they help engage and reroute kids. We're not 100% successful, and we're going to continue to try to be better, and we're wide open for any coaching.
And I guess
Yep.
my point in my long-winded way is that, can we go back and find some more money to hire some more support with mental health issues? I know it's sort of, we talked about it, what, a year and a half ago, if my memory serves me correctly. And then I don't know what became of that, and maybe I missed something, but maybe we need to go back to that issue. And, you know, and the board doesn't want to see the infinite campus information, but that's the job of administrators, and to help out with that to get them to the right place. So I know it's like another thing we had talked about.
We've hired a school social worker as part of that mental health budget. The mental health task force has also had about $40,000 to $50,000 that we brought counseling sessions on school property. So some of our families that don't have insurance access can have their son or daughter seen on school property. And we have provided, I think, up to 10? 7, thank you. Up to 7 free mental health counseling services for children, for young people that are struggling.
When you say social worker, we used to have a social worker too.
No, we might have before my time.
No.
But since my time, we have not had a social worker, and this was specifically for mental health, and she spends most of her time at the high school. We had an AODA coordinator.
And we also had a social worker that didn't spend much time at the high school. They were in the more elementary.
You talk to Joe?
Yeah.
Joe?
Yeah.
He's
He's
not
not our
our.
That's joining forces.
He works, for joining
Yeah.
forces for families. So he's very helpful, but only in specific things that
Yeah.
he's allowed to.
And there was
Joe
somebody else
Salt.
too. I'll look it up.
He's a Dane
Dane
County
County
social
employee.
worker that works out of Netherwood with the NINA fund and helping families. Tends not to get into mental health related issues because his boss is Dane County, and they're very specific what they want the Dane County social workers to work on. But we've expanded, in terms of mental health, we've expanded our services.
Yeah, but and I think that's great, that, maybe we, down the road, we need to look at even more mental health.
I can just tell you that the level of support services that I've seen engaged prior to expulsion has increased dramatically. So that when we see a packet, and that's the second part of the expulsion, the first part is going through the factual basis of the rule violation, and that usually goes quick, but the second part then is, what are we gonna do about it? That's when we get all those records. The level of intervention and attempts to get trained on the right track has increased.
And by
a
no means
ton.
is, what I'm saying
Yeah.
is a criticism, because, you have the history, but what I'm just saying is that, focusing on mental health might be the preventative in lowering our expulsion rates, particularly with AODA and self-medication and the preying on people, the young people who have self-medicated problems.
Yeah, and that has been the equation, and there has been an incredible support network created there. We worked on that, especially with AODA, because of that self-medication type of thing, and created what we called the umbrella, or we had the tree with all it was really good, and we have that umbrella in there, and that's one of the reasons we also created Cynthia's position to assist with that.
Yeah. Gwen, as just a framework and a reference point, I can recall years where the board had 30 expulsion hearings. And the last couple of years, I think last year we had 3 or 4, and this year I'm remembering 2. We've seen a dramatic drop-off, and I think the dramatic...
And that's wonderful.
Absolutely. The dramatic drop-off is directly related to some work with the mental health task force.
And as we move forward to 100% graduation rate, it would be really nice to move forward to a 0 expulsions too.
Yeah, my experience has been that by the time it gets to us, pretty much sources have been attempted, or work's been attempted, and we're at, it's a bottoming out phase. I mean, at some point, some kids got to bottom out, and they get to us, and that expulsion hearing is the last one, and that has some impact, because it's, you're going to be out if you don't shape up, and that shakes up most of the kids that are there and the parents for the most part, and that's where you get the power of the conditional reinstatement, because then we do have the ability to affect behavior, modify behavior through that process in a positive sense. And like I said, it's worked 2/3 of the time.
It's my assumption that a lot of cases where kids are in violation of the rules, it may either be a way of getting attention or acting out, or in some way maybe asking for help as well. But it seems to me there are often a lot of things very early on that may not get detected as quickly, that sort of suggest opportunities for early intervention. And I'm just wondering, Tessa, too, if you might want to chime in on this, whether you think in terms of peer pressure or peer support, or either early identification of issues, where there might be an opportunity to encourage kids or create an atmosphere where kids are encouraged to seek help when they need it, before it gets to the point of behavior that's crossing the line and getting them into trouble.
You're asking me, so
Yeah, whether you think, there are situations where students might feel comfortable sort of providing some feedback, some encouragement, some support to sort of help maybe guide or direct kids to some of the resources that are available within the district if there's some evidence of some struggles going on within the kids.
I think that it would be great if we could have students with like the success stories that Mr. Plenner had talked about. I think that would be wonderful if we had that for current students, so that they could like provide kind of like a support for them. I don't know exactly what like you're asking. Like you want.
I'm sort of trying to think of how we might engage and enlist students more in sort of reaching out to their fellow students. To really sort of, you know, I can speak very personally from experience we had when we did the spring play. And the kids who were involved in rehearsal, it really became family. The kids really cared about the other members of the cast. And when there was a situation where there's some kids who were involved in using some LSD, it was brought to my attention, not to get somebody in trouble, but of concern. And I'm thinking, sort of creating that environment, that the culture of concern that extends just beyond dealing with my issues and my thing, and really, you know, it's sort of a variation maybe of It Takes a Village. You know, I think creating that kind of environment where kids feel some responsibility for and empowered to some extent to look out for and care for each other.
Absolutely.
I think that if we had, like, this is kind of my go-to for this year. Like, I've talked about community involvement a lot, and I think that if we like have kids that, so student council members, but also like just like members of the student body that could be like troubled or in like into like drugs or alcohol, like if we kind of brought them together and kind of had them create some sort of like group, like some sort of like not like safe group, but just like something where they kind of like build relationships with other students, I think that that could definitely prevent.
A club. One of the things that was really struck, we did warm-ups for the rehearsals for the play, and sort of one of the things that we did as a part of the warm-up was just having kids go around, tell us something about themselves that we didn't know, or other people didn't know, and it blew me away. I mean, kids were talking about domestic violence issues. One of the members of the cast broke into tears saying, I just don't feel like I fit in anywhere. And part of it is creating that sense of family or belonging or club where kids feel that there's some support there.
Exactly, and like I think that creating a bond with other students, I think that a lot of the students that are into drugs and alcohols, they sometimes have like, it's sometimes used as an escape of some sort. And so I think that if we were to create, and like honestly, so last week, I don't know if this kind of connects to it, but there was a courage and kindness retreat for the 5th graders and 7th graders. It's at RCI in middle school. These kids are brought into small groups, and like it's just their grades, and they're kind of like encouraged to open up, and like this is just a one-day thing, but I think that if we kind of created some sort of like bonding experience for these kids that don't necessarily associate in the same social groups, like that could definitely prevent potential usage. And
Jim?
You know, I can assure you my team, and I know the folks who sit on the bench who have all been hired by this district are incredibly child-centered. We're going to do everything we really absolutely can to keep every kid engaged and to find the right solution for our kids. The way this is good conversation at the board level, the way that you can help us is providing us with clarity about the kinds of things that you expect us to bring forward at what point in time. So I know Dr. Bussler has listed a few things, a few bullet points that you've kind of looked over in the course of time, whether it's tonight or whether it is a board session in the future. I think you guys need to hash through it so you can give us crystal clarity so that we can know the kind of times where we can exercise discretion and do so with kind of an equity lens versus times in which the board always sees a student in this situation, and that's there just isn't discretion for an administrator to exercise.
It's not easy, I don't think, for the board to give that kind of guidance, because the board has different duties, and one of them is to oversee expulsions, and that's a judicial duty. Not all of our duties, and very few of them actually, are judicial duties. We have to as a group, make a decision on each individual case, weighing first the facts and then what is our judgment on the best solution for this kid. Something that I've come up against in my own conscience in the way that I look at these things judicially as my role as a board member, that I brought up in different of these hearings, is that I've got some issue with the standard recommendation of expelling everybody until they're 21 years old. And I understand that we want to give everybody the best chance, and I love that. I love the fact that this school district is all about rehabilitation. But it seems that almost no matter how we do it, there's still going to be some punitive in expulsion, at least the way that students feel about it. They're being punished. And maybe that's okay. I hope that it's never used as a retribution against the student, and I don't think it is. But the way that in equity that expulsion till 21 years old comes across in different situations, it doesn't really give the school board or the school board members the opportunity to use their own judgment and to see whether that's really the right thing. For an example, let's say that two students are involved in drug-related offenses. It's either their second offense or they're involved in selling drugs, and they're brought before the board. One of these students is 14 years old. Another of these students is 18 years old or close to 18 years old. If they're both expelled until they're 21, that's a really, 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 really long time for a 14-year-old. That is way beyond their comprehension. They cannot understand what it means to behave until they're 21. And even as somebody that works with kids who are from 14 till they're 18, 19, 20 years old, it's hard to comprehend the changes that go through how a person becomes an adult, hopefully, within that time. I think that in the cases where kids are in something besides their senior year, I would hope that we would consider expelling them for a shorter time. Something where they can completely show us that they've rehabilitated, and then we give them the reward of now you do no longer have to be subjected to random backpack searches. You don't have to let us talk to your counselor. You can be a full citizen again. Because you were expelled, you passed the test, now your slate is clean, you're rehabilitated. I don't think that a 14, 15, 16-year-old should be subject to expulsion unless you graduate, you're always going to be expelled here. You're a second-class citizen. We can treat you differently. You're under different rules. You've got the scarlet letter now. Now, maybe all the students don't see that, but the administrators see that, and probably the teachers also see it. I'd like to maybe have us talk about working our way towards a more rehabilitative approach. The first step, or a great many steps that we've taken from the expulsion and you're out to where we are now, where we very often say, you can come back in next month or sometime in the near future with these expectations or these extra rules that you have to follow. Maybe we can come to another way that we can encourage the good behavior that we want to see by rewarding them in the end. Not with just a diploma, but with the gaining of their full citizenship once again within the school district. Because the conditions that we put on these kids, from my perspective, would tell them you're not the same as the rest of these students. You don't have the same privacy. You have extra rules. We can invade your space without warning. And for a year suspension or a year expulsion, I think for a 14-year-old, how could we really ask them to do better than that, in my mind? And that's some of my thoughts, and that's the biggest thing. I really like the way that we work with kids, and I think it's been very successful. For me, I would like to see some of these recommendations or the final results to be some way that the kids can reintegrate before graduation into the general student body in that way.
Charlie?
I'm struck with the fact we're an educational institution. Focuses on learning, and I guess I would like to explore ways in which we might create more opportunities for students to demonstrate that they have learned from their experiences, to show in a concrete and tangible way that they get it, that they understand the reason for rules, the reason that there are consequences for rules and infractions, and to be able to demonstrate that they have in fact learned, which is, I think our goal as an institution is to promote learning, to help them change and redirect their behavior in some positive ways. And so I'm concerned again a little bit because the focus of the conversation is so much on expulsion, that's just one tool and the most drastic tool available to us. A lot of other tools get used in the process, but usually at the point at which the board gets involved or is made aware of what's happening, it's at the point where we've got one tool left, and that's the expulsion tool. And I guess would like to think more expansively, more creatively in terms of what other kind of options we might make available to encourage learning on the part of the students. Make sure that they are able to understand and use that learning opportunity to change their behavior.
You know, Charlie, I think one thing that would be beneficial, and I guess I use my experience of Friends of Oregon School District, where the first thing that we did is we did listening sessions.
Mm-hmm.
So before we made assumptions about what was occurring or what was not occurring, that we actually sat and listened and learned. And so I think a lot of the things that you're talking about, you're making assumptions that things are not occurring. So it might be beneficial to actually listen to what staffs are doing before they get to the point of us. And I know your heart's in the right place, but I think it's important to really listen first about what are the steps that are being taken before they get to us. And that's I'm interested in that as well. And I think, you know, I'd be happy to have those conversations with some of the principals as well, just to learn what are the things that are currently happening.
That's really my point, is that the point at which we become aware of the situation often is when it's reached.
Right, but you're making the assumption that something is not occurring.
No,
and so
not
what
at
I'm
all.
saying is,
Not
I
at
think
all.
we should
A lot of those
learn.
things, obviously aware that those things are occurring, the frustration comes from the fact that the point at which we learn about it is often when it's reached the last step. And that's
Right, and I
frustrating
make the
because
assumption
sometimes the
that things have
options,
been done.
the options at that point seem to have been exhausted.
Right.
Barb?
Exactly.
Barb has a question or a
Just a
point.
few points. First, question, Shannon. Are you still doing the restorative justice circles? Okay. That seems like a great way for students to kind of use each other to help solve problems within the school setting. And it's a good example of something that's already going on that's probably helping prevent some kids getting to the stage of being expelled. I don't think we should take the fact that we have some expulsions as a sign of failure of the system. It's more a sign, as far as I'm concerned, of how complex some of these kids' lives and their problems are. Jim, you asked what else we could do or you should bring us. I personally don't think the board should be getting involved any earlier than we already are. I mean, I think we need to reserve our distance so that when it comes to an expulsion stage, we can participate fully in that kind of discussion. I do think if there are resources that you feel you need, that does come to us through the budget planning process, and that's appropriate. You know, if we are not fully meeting the mental health needs, that would be good to know, although at this point, we might not have options to do anything about that. So, in general, I would say I think the board should feel reassured that there's an awful lot that's happening behind the scenes that we don't know about and we can't know about because it's meant to be confidential. And then the last thing I want to say is I also have concerns about expelling to the age 21, just because I agree with Dan that for young adolescents that's just hard to comprehend, and I think there may be I don't want to see that as a standard recommendation. I would like to see it used when it's clear that in a particular situation it could be helpful. But I think there are some situations, especially with younger students, where a shorter period of being expelled is a good idea. And that's all I have to say.
I want to talk on the 21 because I'm not sure that I would say that it's universal, that it should be applied, but we have reached an understanding that for most cases when we were offering conditional reinstatement, as opposed to, I mean, the alternative to conditional reinstatement is expelling for a period of time. And the conditional reinstatement tool was a form of rehabilitative process that allowed us to work with the student over a period of time and make sure that they stayed on the terms of the reinstatement. And the legal point comes in as to when you do that. And it would be, we had phrased it until graduation or till the age of 21 because that's our legal obligation to educate students is to 21. And so we wanted to keep the ability to enforce the terms of the conditional reinstatement through that time until there was a legal obligation. The option is if we don't have that in there through the end of their career here at Oregon, is then if there is another offense for the same thing, so if it's AODA, you get your third offense at that point in time. Now you go back to the beginning and you don't have those tools available anymore. And that's why we put them in.
Well, it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, if you get your third offense, you can go right to the board. It's up to the administration. We don't have a policy that if you've been expelled once and you've rehabilitated, that you can't go back to your next offense.
And then you can come right back to a hearing, and now you're going through the whole process again, rather than having the ability to the administration at that point under a conditional reinstatement to say, no, you're going to be expelled now, or we're going to, we don't think it's a material violation. Under the 18 to 21, the graduation or 21 standard, the administration has the discretion, but it doesn't mean we invoke the expulsion process all over again for a student who is now shown 3 times that they haven't followed the rules. Okay, and I think as we move on, there are a lot of districts who will say once and you're out forever. I think by saying twice and we'll give you conditional reinstatement, but if it's that third time, we're not going to bring you back through the whole process, the legal process, to have another hearing. That's at the point where the administration makes a decision how they want to handle it.
Well, I think that if it's been 1 year since the last time they were expelled, or 2 years, or whatever the board finds appropriate, and they have another lapse, I don't think it's a problem. I mean, it takes one of my evenings, and that's okay, because this is about a student. It's not about making things easy for the administration, which I think is what you're saying. This is about that student who has shown that they can keep it under wraps for a year, maybe 2 years, and then they lapse again. I say give them another shot before the board, because that student may have a hard life. That student may be in a situation that none of us can comprehend, or maybe it's just something that they've been able to hide for long enough, and we can see through that as well. But I'm not saying give them expulsion for a month. I'm saying that the person you're talking about with this third offense hasn't had one in at least a year.
My questions would be, if we go that route, do we need to look at, is it across the board? Is it based on different types of offenses? And does it open us up to any additional liability? Because we've in a sense changed it from 1, 2 strikes you're out to now 3. And what happens if that third one is catastrophic? Have we opened up the district to additional, so I would say if we go down that road, let's not just say, oh, let's do it. We really need to investigate how we would do it.
And I worry, and this is one of the considerations when we went to that, is if we are selecting as a board who we think we like in that terms that they're gonna go, and not that we wander into equity issues, okay, and open ourselves up to allegations that we are selectively choosing some folks to have more favorable terms of expulsion than others.
I'm not worried about that. We've got 7 people on a board making a judicial decision. We can make any decision from no punishment to the maximum punishment if we want to, and there's no arguments against equity.
And Dan, I'm telling you that
Every situation is distinguishable.
170, this hasn't been an issue. We haven't had.
Steve, if you've been to any of the expulsion hearings, you know this is an issue in every hearing.
No, I'm telling you, the fact that we imposed that term on students has not been a negative to the student in reaching that student's end goal. So I think the concerns that you're raising aren't borne out by our experience.
One thing that I'm noticing about the process tonight is that when board members are bringing ideas forward in a open format such as this and brainstorming, kind of, these ideas are being shot down. And I think that what we need to do is back off, write down the ideas, and then take some time and to, like the mental health thing, I thought was very well explained. But to constantly rely, like the mental health or bring more students in, I understand liability issues and I understand all of this stuff, but we want it to be restorative, we don't want it to be punitive, and we're talking 2 different things here. And so somehow we're gonna have to figure out how to meld them together. We don't have the luxury of having been to 170 expulsions, or disluxury. But at the same time, the ones that I've been to, I remember one of them, we changed it from 21, and there was a gasp from administration that somehow we had broken protocol. Okay, maybe gasp is too harsh of a word, but there was concern afterwards about, we should have followed protocol. And what I like about tonight is that we are exploring new ideas, new protocols, and new policies down the road. And so maybe we need to find out how many expulsions led to dropout. Maybe we need to figure out how many expulsions led to restorative care. That's another task force or another study or, more data collecting, but, I'm feeling really like, why do I need to say anything tonight? Because it's gonna get shot down. And, unfortunately, that's how I feel. We're either gonna have a conversation or we're not. We're gonna keep it the same way or we're gonna explore new avenues. Yes, we've moved forward in many great ways, but when we see the kid at expulsion, we have 2 hours or less to make a decision, And all we see are these behavioral reports, we see the facts, et cetera, and I understand that that's equity, but we also don't see, I mean, we can have some feelings about perhaps the nature of the situation, and maybe I'm a little bit more sensitive to that because I've worked with literally thousands of students, from gifted and talented to at risk, and so, you know, we need to be careful about tonight and not throw out ideas and say, well, and make excuses for not listening to them.
Charlie, when we go through, we're pretty much at closing. Anything you want to add to the conversation as we go through?
Only to suggest, I think, I'm very pleased that we're having this conversation. And I think, sort of a parting shot, I really would like to explore maybe creating an opportunity, a forum, where some of this conversation could involve more students in terms of really getting some feedback, some ideas. Ultimately, what we're trying to do, I think, is we're trying to encourage, in some cases, changes in behavior. And ultimately, the test is what works. And it seems to me getting some feedback from students in terms of their perception of what works would be really informative for us in perhaps guiding our policies and our recommendations in terms of how we might address.
Let's talk to some of the expelled people that have come back.
Krista?
No, I feel like my point was to listen first, and you've talked about listening to students. I think we also have to listen to staff and really make ourselves more informed about what happens pre-expulsion. And so I don't feel like that was confrontational. I feel like that was a suggestion to say, let's listen first and learn, so then we can come forward with informed discussion.
Dan?
I want to be careful that we don't create any false dichotomies here about there's an either or, either we expel them for a certain period of time or we give them conditional reinstatement. I think it's clear that you can do both, and I think we would be taking quills out of our quiver, or however you say it. We would
Arrows out of our quiver.
Yeah, arrows out of our quiver. We should have all the tools that we can. So I think being able to consider or allowing ourselves to consider shorter time than up until 21 is giving us more chances to work with the kids or to help them if we think that's the best thing. I'm not saying it's the best in all cases. I'm not concerned about liability. I've been involved in many liability lawsuits. That's not true. Actually sued a school district at one point, or threatened to, for a client because of a policy. And that's rare. In these cases, I can't imagine how a board could be liable for giving one particular expulsion in one case and another particular expulsion in another case. It's a judicial decision. Those are very well protected and very hard to challenge. It does not get overturned unless there's some reason, like it's your cousin or you took some money under the table, that these kind of things can go bad for a school district. All of us here on the board are very conscientious people. We all take this all very seriously, and I think that I'm proud that we all do. Because of that, and because that we're doing these kind of things, it shows that we are not going to ever be found liable in a case where we make one decision in one case and one decision in another case. I'm not concerned about that. That's all I have.
Barb?
I'm just going to say briefly, I do think that equity is a concern in our own unconscious reactions to students who come with different personalities and attitudes. But I do think we could have more discussion, maybe not tonight, but in the future, about possible criteria to use in deciding on what the age of expulsion could be. And for instance, it could be number of years instead of actual age. That's one option to consider. There may be other criteria that we could use to make sure that we are treating students fairly, which I think we do need to be very careful of.
I hope that you understood my comments were tonight not to be confrontational or to shoot people down, but to explain that over the years we have developed a paradigm for why things were done and why certain recommendations are on board and why we expel to graduation or age 21, and what we've seen, what we've tried to accomplish by it, and what's worked. And I think they have. And so I think before we say we're going to move from that, we have to recognize that it has been successful. And if we're going to move from it, we have to have a reason for it. Dan, the risk of disparate treatment allegation is there whether or not we're acting as a board in an expulsion hearing as opposed to making a decision at the table like tonight. It doesn't matter. And boards get sued for the way they handle students in expulsion matters if they believe they're being treated differently because they are a member of a protected classification. So we need to be careful of picking and choosing. But it was a good starting conversation tonight in terms of getting us on board and getting some history and recommendation with stuff. And we've got one set for next week, or will be set for next week. 2 weeks?
2 weeks.
2 weeks. So if you haven't replied to your doodle poll, go look, because we've got one set.
We tossed in the doodle poll November 7th, Monday.
It's the Monday, Wednesday,
November 9th and November 10th.
Okay, I'll be out of town.
Okay.
Can I just talk about, can I just say something?
Yeah.
So, it really helps Jeannie and me if you respond to those doodle polls right away, because we have timeline issues that we are required to follow. And sometimes what happens is by the time some people respond, other people's dates have changed. So it really, really helps us, and we greatly appreciate if you check your email and respond right away to those doodles, because this is one area that we don't have. We have to get it done within a certain window, and we have to have at least 4 of you there. So we really appreciate that.
This is an actual expulsion, not a meeting about talking about expulsion.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Brian,
No, I already answered.
any last words from you?
Yeah, just one closing item, and I know I can speak for the entire administrative team on this. We take no umbrage if the board changes a recommendation. That is totally your policy decision. What we try to bring you, whether it's from Shannon or whether it's from Jim, or to whatever extent they've involved me in the process, is the best, what we think is the best recommendation. And there are no hard feelings if the 7-member board decides that that best recommendation is wrong. That's up for you guys to decide. That's one of the reasons you do it in closed session. It's also one of the reasons that we're not involved in the process. So whenever you all decide to bring the student back, or for that matter not to bring the student back, we respect and honor it and keep on moving forward with the youngsters' education. So you should never feel that you need to keep us happy or that we're going to be frustrated with whatever decision you make.
Okay, one last.
In response to your observation, Brian, I think part of the challenge, the difficulty is that when we have an expulsion hearing, we're often given an inadequate opportunity to really get a feel for all of the other things that have happened before we get to that point. And so, maybe finding some way to have a little bit more advanced listening would be helpful, just in terms of sort of heads up. When it comes to, you've got an expulsion hearing, you've got 2.5 hours. I remember an expulsion hearing we had where we had been from 5:30 in the afternoon till 3 in the morning. I don't want to do that, but I would think that there might be some opportunities to identify sort of heads up on issues that may be of concern, maybe before it gets to an expulsion.
Glenn?
I think the conversation's been started, and I think that's really good. I've had some experiences working with at-risk kids that sometimes they do need more than two strikes. We need to discuss that, and despite the fact that it's working now, our student population is changing. They're more sensitive. And the last thing we want to see is anybody fail. And that's why, and I think Dan said it very eloquently, and Barb too, is like, we want to be able to support our students and give them the best that they can. And I agree with the 14-year-old, they won't make it. Maybe they will. But we should give them as much help as possible, any way we can.
Okay, that concludes our agenda for this evening. I entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. Dan, second. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, everyone. See you on the 14th, if not before the next motion.
I was going to give you a quick report on Hamilton.
Dan?
But it was fabulous. Got back 3:45 in the morning.
That's a little tough on I-90, huh?
Yeah, it was. Long drive from Chicago. Got a chance to go to the Casbah yet.